For characters, I'm going to start off with Amir because he is the central main focus of the novel. He is the protagonist and it comes from his point of view and it's his narrative. Something you should know about Amir is that he lives with his father Baba along with Baba's friend / servant Ali, and his son Hassan. Hassan and Amir are essentially best friends and they grew up being very, very close until something happens between them because Amir essentially betrays Hassan and it leads them to their falling out or growing apart. Amir also strives to get Baba's approval and it leads him to just have that constant battle in his head of trying to win over Baba or to feel Baba's pride within him. Part of his betrayal, he chooses to make Baba proud over doing an act of kindness for Hassan. A quote I have is, "I always felt like Baba hated me a little, and why not? After all, I had killed his beloved wife, his beautiful princess, hadn't I? The least I could have done was to have the decency to have turned out a little more like him, but I hadn't turned out like him, not at all," and that is on page 19. During the birth of Amir, his mom dies. Amir feels that Baba resents him partially due to the fact that he took his wife away from him. Moving on to Hassan. Hassan is part of the ethnic group of the Hazaras. It is seen as not as valuable or worthy as the traditional Afghanistan descent. And this leads to Hassan getting bullied a lot, and especially by a character named Asef. The quote I have is, "I can still see his tiny low set ears and that pointed stub of a chin, a meaty appendage that looked like it was just added as a mere afterthought, and the cleft lip just left of the midline where the Chinese doll maker's instruments may have slipped, or perhaps he had simply grown tired and careless," on page 3. Hassan is constantly getting picked on or made fun of for his deformities. And because of that, Amir feels insecure about their friendship. He starts to wonder if he should be friends with a Hazara like Hassan, and he doesn't want people to really see him with Hassan. The only time that he really truly interacts with Hassan is when it is beneficial to him or if it is at their home. Hassan and his father Ali live with Baba and Amir. Baba and Amir are very wealthy and are nice enough to Ali and Hassan because they're family friends. So they let them live with them, but also they do clean their home. Moving on to Baba, he has a thick neck, black eyes, and unruly brown hair on page 317. Baba is a very prideful man and he's very wealthy. He is a very high class, he's very wealthy, and he has a lot of luxuries in Afghanistan. He has normal cars as we would here, and he lives in a very nice home, which isn't traditional in Afghanistan. His son is Amir, and he doesn't exactly resent Amir, but they're so unsimilar that he finds it hard to believe that Amir is his son. He wishes that Amir were more like him, and it kind of leads to them being distant. Moving on to Ali. Ali has a congenital paralysis of his lower face muscles and a condition that rendered him unable to smile and perpetually grim-faced, page 81. Ali, like I said, is Baba's friend, and Baba allows Ali and his son Hassan to live with them in exchange that they do clean their house. In the United States, Amir meets his wife, Soraya. Soraya also comes from an Afghanistan family, and they date, and eventually they do get married. Soraya and Amir are similar in the fact that they have made sins or mistakes in their life and felt guilty for them. Soraya, unlike Amir, is able to confess to Amir and feel less guilty or clean again, where Amir still cannot confess to what he has done. Rahim Khan is a family friend. He does not live with Baba and Ali, Hassan, and Amir, but he still goes to other extravagant parties. And Rahim actually acts more of a father to Amir than Baba does. Rahim Khan is proud of Amir's ability to write, and he encourages him to keep going and to eventually get schooling for his writing, which Amir actually does go to school to write in the United States. Rahim Khan is also the one that breaks the news to Amir that Sohrab, Hassan, and his wife's son is in Afghanistan and that Amir needs to rescue him. Next I have Asef. Asef is the bully who bullies Hassan in Afghanistan for being a Hazara and the friendship he has with Amir, which Amir is very ashamed of. Eventually, Asef becomes a Taliban member, and Amir sees him again when he has to go save Sohrab, and eventually wins over Sohrab from Asef. Another character I have is the taxi driver and his brother when when Amir is trying to go save Sohrab. Amir feels guilty and out of place when he goes back to Afghanistan because so much has changed negatively. But the taxi driver is very condescending and unfriendly to him because Amir wouldn't know that because he was so wealthy. He had never seen the negative details of Afghanistan. So his brother and the taxi driver make him feel unwelcome because Amir has always been fortunate enough to be wealthy enough to never have to go through the negative aspects where they know truly what Afghanistan is like. Lastly, I have Sohrab. Sohrab is Amir's half-nephew. Hassan and Amir are half-brothers. Baba had an infidelity issue where he cheated with Ali's wife, Sanabar, and they ended up having Hassan, which Ali did not know about. So Sohrab is Amir's half-nephew. And then because the Taliban, Hassan, when they are living in the Hazara huts, is killed along with his wife by the Taliban. And this causes Sohrab to be an orphan. And then Sohrab is sold to Asef and the Taliban as essentially a sexual slave. Sohrab is sexually abused by Asef, the bully of Hassan. And Asef makes it his mission to torture Sohrab because he is Hassan's son.
In the book The Kite Runner, there are three main settings. The kind of more generalized main setting, but that plays a big part in the whole story is Afghanistan, which is the country of origin for all the main characters, like Amir and Hassan and Baba and all those other characters. The more specific main setting within Afghanistan is Kabul, which is the city that Amir and Hassan grew up in and spent their childhood in. Later on in the story, Amir and his father escape Afghanistan and Kabul once the war starts, and they flee to San Francisco, California, which is where Amir starts and spends his adulthood. He finishes his education there, he gets a career, he eventually gets married. However, he goes back to Kabul to help rescue Sohrab, which is Hassan's son, which in general plays into the ideas of our themes, which were redemption, the idea of finding a home, because Amir always said that even though his new home is San Francisco, he always felt like his home will always be Afghanistan and Kabul specifically.
Alright, so let's talk structure in a standard form of exposition, rising action, falling action, etc. So in this book, The Kite Runner, the exposition, introduces us to the characters that we're going to see throughout the book, such as Amir, Hassan, Baba, and Ali. It really sets the groundwork for what is going to happen throughout the rest of the novel. It's pretty important to the rest of the story, naturally. It leads directly into the rising action. which is going to be the majority of the book. And the rising action is actually including this major conflict in between Hassan and Asef, in which Hassan gets raped and Amir watches, unable to actually do anything, which is going to drive the plot going forward. And it also includes when Amir moves away to San Francisco, gets married, and attempts to have a kid. So the climax of this book especially is actually when Amir travels to Pakistan and meets with Rahim Khan. And it kind of continues into finding out the existence of Sohrab and also the death of Hassan. He's able to. This climax also actually goes into going to the football match and the stoning and finally being able to meet with the official, which of course is revealed to be Asef, Hassan's rapist, who is now also raping his son. The falling action of this comes during the climax, when Asef does brutally beat up Amir and Sohrab shoots Asef in the eye with his slingshot. It covers when Sohrab has his suicide attempt and also the struggle that Amir has in adopting Sohrab and trying to figure out how it's going to go with his parents not having official death certificates as they were murdered by the Taliban. And the resolution is when Amir and Sohrab are back in San Francisco and flying that kite, which really brings the story in a very bittersweet but full circle.
Within the book, some key themes include redemption, the past, and finding home. For redemption, it's highlighted mostly through the actions Amir takes on his journey in Kabul to find Sohrab, his nephew. On page 289, Amir is beaten up by his old bully, Asef, who is now a part of the Taliban. He must endure this in order to gain back Sohrab. He says, "My body was broken. Just how badly I wouldn't find out until later. But I felt healed. Healed at last." I laughed. This relates to an incident when Amir watched Asef rape Hassan when they were young kids. As an adult, Amir has carried this load of shame and knowledge that he did nothing to stop it. So while being beaten up by Asef, he feels like he can finally pay for his betrayal towards Hassan and endures the pain in order to save Sohrab, and in a way, Hassan himself. The event from his childhood also connects to themes of the past and how his actions as a child in Afghanistan influence his life as an adult living in America. He even says it himself on page 281. "What was that saying about the bad penny? My past was like that, always turning up." In the beginning of the book, young Amir is very conscious of the choices he chooses to make, such as when he frames Hassan for theft due to his need to rid guilt after watching him get raped. These events stay with him his entire adulthood and ultimately lead up to him making the choice to go on the journey of rescuing Sohrab, the last connection of Hassan that still remains alive. This is a prime example of how Amir's childhood has a profound impact on him even through his adulthood. Finally, the book tackles the theme of finding home. A big portion of this book is Amir and his father immigrating to the U.S. after escaping Afghanistan in the 80s, and their new life in the Bay Area. While his father struggles to acclimate to their new living situation, Amir prospers in the U.S., going to college, becoming a published author, and eventually getting married to an African-American woman. He acknowledges the U.S. as his home when he and Sohrab travel to the U.S. He says, "We arrived home about 7 months ago on a warm day in August 2001. Page 357. When he was a child in Afghanistan, he felt like he couldn't make his father proud as they had very little in common, and he was a very weak child there in the sense that he couldn't stick up for himself, but had to have Hassan do that for him. When moving to the U.S., he finds his own place within the world and recognizes the U.S. as his home."
So this book is actually filled with different symbols and things that actually have more of a meaning than what originally meets the eye when you first read the book, which makes you kind of think about what's going on underneath just the words. So I'm going to bring up 3 of them right here. We're going to bring up lambs, we're going to bring up the kite, and we're also going to bring up the pomegranate tree. So we'll start with the lambs, and the lamb as an animal has always been seen as kind of a sacrifice in many cultures. You've got sayings such as lambs to the slaughter, the sacrificial lamb. It's referenced biblically in many different circumstances. It's an animal that's frequently not able to fight back. That's what it's known for as an animal. And in this book, it's kind of used in that same way. Especially at one point in the book, Amir brings up that Hassan was the price to pay, that he was the sacrificial lamb in order to win Baba, his father. He wanted to win the affirmation of his father through Hassan, and he had to sacrifice the friendship in order to really get to know him as a person. And the lamb in this book is going to represent something that's going to be killed or achieved in order to get to a higher goal. So the next one that we're going to talk about is the kite. And the kite is pretty interesting because it changes meaning kind of throughout the story. So if we're looking at the very beginning of the story, that exposition, that 2-page little segment, you're going to look at Amir and he looks out at the kites and he thinks about his past and he thinks about it almost somberly as regret. He looks at these kites and it represents his sadness. But when we go back to Amir's childhood, he looks at the kites and it shows his happiness when he does it. He feels very happy. It's his best memory is when he's flying that kite or kite fighting with Hassan or doing it with Baba. It shows kind of how his happiness goes. And when you go all the way to the end of the book, that very last kind of resolution with Sohrab, you're going to see Amir look at the kites and reminisce again positively, which is what he hasn't been able to done since he was a child because of that guilt that he had, that he associated with Hassan's rape when it came to running after the kite. So it goes kind of full circle there. The pomegranate tree is right outside of Amir's family home, and Amir and Hassan frequently go and they meet up by this pomegranate tree, and at some point they even carve their own names into the trunk, which deepens their bond. And when they're kids, this tree is very healthy and it bears fruit. And then Amir leaves, of course, to flee, and 20 years later, when he does come back to his childhood home, this pomegranate tree is dead. It no longer bears fruit, and there's really just nothing there. It's a shell of its former self, which can also kind of represent Amir and Hassan's friendship, as when they were younger, it was a healthy friendship. And it was just a great friendship. And then after Amir doesn't prevent Hassan's rape and then accuses Hassan of stealing, and Hassan is forced to move with Ali, the tree almost kind of dies. And that's just like their friendship, which eventually wilted and died with the death of Hassan and the betrayal of Amir.
Hello, welcome to my section of this presentation, which is point of view and narration. So first of all, the Kite Runner is in first person, and we look through Amir's eyes, who's the main character and protagonist of the book. So we view the world through his thoughts, his feelings, how he processes things as well, because we have his thoughts there. And the author's style plays into the style of narration through his more fluid and expressive writing, which touches the reader. His imagery is very poetic and very vivid, which I will have a quote I will show at the end. The style of narration allows for readers to connect more with the book and how simple the language is, because it doesn't have overcomplicated diction, where it kind of like breaks up the flow for the reader when they have to kind of reread over to figure out what's going on or what he's saying, or when they have to go online or go through a dictionary to find the meaning of that word. He's able to use that vivid imagery as well, again, to be able to portray how characters are feeling, since we are viewing through Amir's eyes and his point of view. We view the world as he does, so we can't see what other characters are thinking, and we just have to assume what's going on through how he views their expressions, their reactions to things, their actions. So the vivid imagery, an example I chose was on page 229. Here we go. He flicked the ash off his cigarette and gave himself a self-satisfied look in the rearview mirror. He was a Tajik, a lanky, dark man with a weather-beaten face, narrow shoulders, and a long neck punctuated by a protruding Adam's apple that only peeked from behind his beard when he turned his head. And then the second example that I had for his style of narration was on page 293. Faces. They're all wearing green hats. They slip in
talk rapidly, use words I don't understand. I hear other voices, other noises, beeps and alarms, and always more faces. I thought that quote really portrayed how Amir views things because of just how he processes things, how he thinks of other things, just that kind of element. Thank you for coming to my part of the presentation. Have a nice day.